Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. Thanks so much for joining us for our final 2025 Experts Historic Preservation Lecture Series lecture. Great. Okay, I'm going to get started. Again, I want to welcome everyone. Welcome back, those who have attended previous lectures in the series. My name is Andrea Nandoskar. I'm the Education Program Manager at Historic Hawai Foundation. And as I mentioned a moment ago, today is our final lecture. The series is curated and co-sponsored by the UH School of Architecture's Historic Preservation Graduate Certificate Program and Historic Hawai Foundation. This year's theme is Conserving Architecture, and today's presenter will speak about conserving modern architecture. Just a note, yes, all of the lectures have been recorded, and this one is being recorded as well, and they'll be available on the HHF YouTube channel and the event webpage. And if you can take a moment to complete the survey at the end, that's very helpful to us, so we appreciate it. For anyone who is new to Historic Hawai Foundation, we are a statewide nonprofit that helps people save historic places. These are sites that tell the stories of the many layers of history in Hawaii. We do this through education, advocacy, assistance, and protection of and for historic places. I'd now like to warmly welcome our series partner, Dr. William Chapman, Dean of the School of Architecture, University of Hawaii at Manoa, who will introduce today's presenter. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and thanks, Michelle, for your help on this too. And aloha mai kako to everybody in the audience. It is really a pleasure to introduce our speaker today, and this is in some ways very personal because Graham has been a leading figure in the local chapter of Docomomo. 2019, we had the national meeting of Docomomo here. And I also had the good fortune, I think before Graham had jumped into this academic and professional area, of helping out Fung and Associates when they did the Modernism study, which was done through Historic Hawai Foundation. So Historic Hawai Foundation has been really a part of this. So for you older timers out there, the future seems to lie with the preservation of modernism, and there's a great deal of enthusiasm that reminds me of the enthusiasm we had back in the day for the preservation of Victorian architecture, which was seen as something that many people weren't very interested in. And now, of course, we've moved on to preserving the very buildings that were once threatening the buildings that I was trying to preserve. And I've tried to move with the times, and I've done the best I can with that. So many of you know we've now moved the graduate certificate program in historic preservation into the School of Architecture, where I'm the director again. And it's so it's really appropriate that we would mark that with a talk on a series of talks on conserving architecture, but particularly the talk today on conserving modern architecture. So Graham is a Oahu-based architect and co-founder of Kokomo Studio, and he's the curator at the Ossipoff Cabin, where he has led many people on tours. He's the president of Docomomo US Hawaii chapter, and he chaired that national symposium back in 2019. He serves with me on the Historic Preservation Review Board, and he's taught as a lecturer at the University of Hawaii School of Architecture. We also are proud to say that Graham is a graduate of the School of Architecture. He holds his doctorate, where he wrote a thesis called Tropical Modern Residential Architecture, Elements, Vocabulary, and Language, where he ended up cataloging and researching modernism from around the world and creating a text of 300 pages with photos and diagrams. His professional and academic work focuses on mid-century modern architecture, particularly in the tropics. And he has done a lot of documentation of buildings that have been either not known of or ill understood in the past. So Graham, I count you among my friends, so it's great to have you here. And thank you so much for giving your time today and your expertise. So I will take away my picture and let you have the full screen now. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, and thank you for having me. Hopefully my connection doesn't cut out. I guess these windy days, the Wi-Fi and cell service around here has been a little bit sketchy. So hopefully I stick through here. Yeah, uh, Bill asked me to talk about kind of the conservation of modern buildings, and I wanted a little bit get a little bit more specific than that and look at the residences. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Bill talked about kind of these different facets of my, I want to call it my nerdism for and fandom of modern era buildings. And that comes from kind of many different hats that I wear and many different kind of avenues that I get in terms of seeing these buildings, conserving these buildings, restoring these buildings, and whenever I can, sharing these buildings. So when I was in school at UH, I got great exposure and experiences seeing some of these houses and seeing some of these buildings, you know, particularly like the Little Strand House I saw kind of in my early undergrad years, and had interactions with the Ossipoff documents very early when they first were donated to the Hamilton Library. I saw that Malia is here from UH Hamilton Library. And kind of these opportunities in school, I think, you know, definitely introduced me to some of the great, often forgotten architecture of Hawaii, and really kind of influenced what I would ultimately do for my doctorate, which was this, you know, dive into tropical modern residential architecture and looking at not just Hawaii's big, you know, collection of tropical modernist residential architecture of mid-century, but also comparing it in the context of all the other kind of tropical modernists, you know, from Brazil, from Australia, you know, Mexico, and kind of looking all around and seeing how all of these different architects working in this region, in this time period, started creating things that really seemed to fit their context, their climate, and their cultures around them. So that kind of started my big path towards pursuing this as really a more of a kind of a niche career. Bill also mentioned my involvement with Docomomo. That kind of came out right after graduating. I've now served on that board as president 3 different terms. One of them was with that national conference in 2019. I also serve with Bill on the Hawaii Historic Places Review Board. And I think one of the best things about that is getting to see some of these historic residences that have been nominated and getting firsthand experience looking at them and kind of learning about them and almost kind of like a sneak peek before they become, you know, famous on the list of historic places here in Hawaii. And when I was teaching at UH for 6 years, I would always try to then in turn share that same love of residential architecture, mid-century architecture with my students, bringing them up to the Little Strand House and bringing them on all these field trips, as many as I could. Often I would bring them to the Ossipoff cabin, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later and my involvement with it. But also the Little Strand House, which I'm an advisory board member of. But really, all of those different facets, academic, kind of nonprofit, organizational boards, and all that kind of stuff has been pro bono work, you know, work that I do because I'm passionate about this. And luckily, a lot of that leads to actual work projects, actual clients with Kokomo Studio, the firm that I'm kind of co-founded with a buddy of mine. And yeah, and so we've had the opportunity to kind of work on private residences So maybe we'll jump into that, and let's go to the next slide here. So this isn't a project that isn't a Kokomo project by any means, but this is something that I think was initially advertised with this lecture. So I thought I'd at least cover it. Is the Jean Charlot house, originally designed by Pete Wimberly in 1958. And this house is an incredible home. It's on the State Historic Register. It has a very interesting history. It's this kind of masterpiece collaboration between Wimberly and Charlot. It has these elements of kind of classic Hawaii mid-century architecture with single wall construction and redwood and materiality. It's got these elements of kind of Charlot's interests and kind of upbringing, both with kind of these Mexican kind of themes in it, a lot of love for Hawaii and kind of Polynesian um, moments, and then kind of like classic Pete Wimberly, dynamic, iconic kind of mid-century architecture with like cantilevered stairs and cantilevered dining tables, and just kind of a lot of the kind of more ambitious work that he's kind of known for. So maybe go to the next slide. What's great about this house is that it remains relatively unchanged from its inception, and it's got just a plethora of beautiful details and artwork integrated into it. It's a really unique house. It's got a lot of things that are kind of common to a lot of mid-century houses in Hawaii, particularly just materiality. Post and beam, the redwood, all that kind of stuff. As mentioned, concrete block, stainless steel countertops. Maybe go to the next slide. But it's also got these elements that are just completely unique and only found in this home, and are one-off things that there isn't some institutional knowledge to kind of maintain and restore, because you don't find a giant fresco mural at a lot of residences. You find them mostly in kind of civic buildings, educational buildings, banks, things like that. But name another house that has a giant mural like this. I can't think of any. Or hand painted tiles, things like that. I mean, but what's incredible about this place again is just how much of it is still there. Original kind of furniture, original upholstery, things like that. Let's go to the next page. One of the challenges, though, is with these homes that are so unique and these kind of one-off art pieces that they are, is that sometimes they were experimenting with unique materials. And so this house has this use of hapu'u fern kind of tiles on the interior and exterior of this one wall at the house, and it's a complete novel use of that material. I've never seen another building or house that uses this anywhere in Hawaii. Hapu'u fern, right? You think of the ferns you can find on Big Island. There's very few of them here on Oahu. Imagine how big they had to grow, and how large these ferns must have been in order for them to harvest just the bark from like the stem of the fern and turn it into these kind of flat tiles, 1.5 feet by maybe 6 inches tall. And on the inside of the house, where they're kind of facing the dining room, they're in relatively good condition for being 70 years old. But on the exterior of the house, they've been exposed to a lot of sun. There's even a lot of water damage. There was a flood at one point where kind of the bottom row of them have all been damaged. 70 years later, how do you repair this novel material? How do you harvest hapu'u like this? Do you try to do something where you find material that looks like it, or do you try to get a source for hapu'u fern? It's a kind of a unique challenge with these very artistic homes. Let me go to the next page. What is nice about this house in terms of preserving in the long run, or kind of the conservation efforts, is that there is a huge amount of information about it. The Charlot collection at Hamilton Library has original drawings and documents and sketches by both Wimberly and Charlot. There's correspondence, there's, contracts, there's so much information that, one can really try to dig into it and kind of reverse engineer it, or really there isn't any reverse engineering that's needed. All the information's there. It's just kind of like if something were to break, you look at the drawings and you put it back as it was. You could put it back to its original kind of specifications and everything. Hopefully those materials still exist. When, for example, a golf ball went through one of the stained glass windows here in the front, um, and put a golf ball sized hole in it. Well, how do you find a piece of stained glass that matches what was there? Well, luckily, number 18L KDR amber here is called out on this drawing, and one could then look up and find if this manufacturer is still around. Could they still source this glass? And luckily, I think it has been. So this type of resource is invaluable for maintaining and conserving these types of homes. Let's go to the next page. What's also super helpful from that collection is that there's a whole photo album of construction photos. So we can, see how this was built. And so if there are things that are different from the drawing set that we could, visually see in person, we can look back at the construction photos and really get a better idea about how it was built. And if things are, slightly skewed, or if they've kind of made changes after the fact or during the process, this is like another invaluable resource. Let's go to the next page. What's also beneficial is that then this house was photographed and publicized quite a lot. And so there's these great photos of it right after its completion in 58, actually before some of the additions on the lanai and such. So you can see what, if the house were to be completely restored to this kind of museum-like setting, a lot of these furniture pieces exist, but the carpet's not there, the other art pieces aren't there, the books aren't there on the shelf anymore, coffee table's not there. And so if one really wanted to go and dive into it and recreate what was in this photo, there are these photos in of almost every room, and you can really source through what was there and try to recreate this time period if one wanted to. Let's go to the next page. And from these photos, you could see still like a lot of it, other than, some of the artifacts that are missing and the artwork that's missing, the house is in its original condition. I mean, it looks unchanged from these photos. These could have been black and white photos taken yesterday, just with different artwork or different staging. Check out the next photo. But there's still challenges, right? So the history of this house in terms of ownership was that after the Charlots passed, the house was donated to the university. The university owned it for a couple of decades. The School of Architecture kind of had kuleana over its management, but there was no real funding in order to maintain it and do these long-term maintenance projects that a house of 70 years old needs. Even if it's built out of redwood, some wood panels and some wood beams still have termite damage, and there's weather damage and all these other kind of just long-term damage things that happen. The house within the past couple of years has been turned back over to the Charlot family, and now they're looking for, what do we do with this house? How do we find revenue streams to maintain this house? What are the options for it? I mean, at one point we were helping the Charlots do some small tours, a couple of weekends over a couple of months. And that was one way that we were starting to bring people in and kind of create some sort of revenue that we could then give back to the Charlots so that they could do some of these maintenance projects. And that's kind of a difficult thing to do because it involves someone, opening it up, doing tours regularly, doing tickets, counting sales. Do you set up a nonprofit to take donations? There's a lot of kind of logistics involved in that, when really you just kind of need to do some basic repairs on the house. So, finding these revenue streams is sometimes a big challenge, even if there's tons of resources available in terms of figuring out what is original about this house, and how do we keep it and maintain it and restore it. Try to go to the next slide. As a kind of different story, same architect is the Pete Wimberly's own residence in Manoa. Built in 1945 with some additions done in 51 and 55. This house is another really exceptional, really experimental home that, Wimberly is mostly known for his resort architecture and some of his kind of more iconic Hawaiiana, dare I say, tiki styled architecture, but very few residences that he did. And so I think he was taking a lot of risks with them, particularly with his own house. And so it's got these moments that are, very iconic, big, checkerboard brise soleil on the outside, a suspended stairwell on the outside, and the way that it's kind of sited on this steep hill with all this foliage around it kind of is pretty awesome. Next slide. The interior is also luckily pretty intact. It's got a lot of wear and tear. It's 70, 80-year-old house at this point. Wood has faded, wood has been, it's an all wood house. So it's a lot of kind of scratches and wears and tears of normal kind of living over that much time. Fabrics have faded. Furniture has kind of been, dinged up, scratched up and all that kind of stuff, normal wear and tear, but also, it's the original chairs that Pete Wimberly built for his dining table. It's got original artifacts that he sourced on his trips hanging from the ceiling. Really cool. If you go to the next slide. You can see how it's this, pretty awesome example of tropical modernism. It's just a kind of a giant shed roof placed on top of a steep hillside. Half of it sitting on grade with this kind of green slab on grade here, and just kind of a bug screen. No wall, back lanai space, a big sliding doors can bifurcate this space off from the kind of the front space with the brise soleil. Original artwork still hanging on the walls. Original furniture. Incredible home. Try to go to the next slide. In terms of historical resources, though, despite this being the architect's own home, and despite it also still being in the architect's family, the Wimberly family, there are very few historical resources that we have on it. I've personally gone through what is available at the Wimberly archives, kind of their boxes that they have at their office. There's not a drawing set there. Wimberly's daughter, who owns the house now, doesn't live there but lives elsewhere in Manoa. She doesn't have any original drawings of this place, and it was a house that was widely published. So here's architectural record 1953, lots of photographs of it from when it was first completed. A couple of small little drawings of the floor plans. Not a lot of information again, though. So I go next slide. It was made famous in the Sunday Advertiser and kind of newspaper articles. There's these great Winkham photos, Robert Winkham photos, and kind of other candid photos that are available in the Wimberly archives of it after completion, showing kind of different interior layouts over its kind of different decades, how they move things around, how some of the furniture is still there, some of the furniture has gone missing. But showing just kind of how unique and really special this place is. Next slide. But the challenges with a house like this is it is in the, it's still in the hands of the Wimberly family, and they have, very limited resources to maintain this place. So, luckily they have kind of a caretaker tenant that's living there and helping with some rental income and helping to do some, kind of small minor maintenance projects over the years. But one of the main issues with this building now is that there's been a bunch of settling over the past 70 years. So as I said, half of it is sitting slab on grade on the kind of the uphill side, and then the other half is kind of post and pier, kind of elevated, kind of hanging off the cliff. Well, those two halves of the house are now slowly separating, which is not good because they're all under one roof. And we're starting to kind of very early do the process of, okay, well, we need to fix the foundation. We got to kind of, raise up and fix, the how the house meets the ground. But we don't want to do that without completely understanding the structural system. And this front brise-soleil looks like a very important part of this structural system, but some of those panels have glass in them, some of them have just bug screen in them, but also some of them now over the years have kind of skewed and settled in different ways. So they're probably taking up a lot of shear resistance. So if we start moving the house, are we in the risk of snapping some of those boards? Are we in the risk of shattering some of that glass? And then, now you've kind of opened up a whole can of worms of terms of restoring it. And, all you're trying to do is just save it from falling off the hill. So we're trying to gather as much information as we can and really understand the building before we do so many of these drastic projects. But also that big project needs to happen. It's a huge infrastructure kind of project with a huge amount of cost. So, figuring out how one even pays for it is going to be a big challenge for this house. Let's go to the next house. One of the other houses that I've had the privilege of helping out on over the years is Osipov's cabins up at Palihua. So Vladimir Osipov kind of needs no introduction, but I think prior to 5 years ago, his cabins needed some sort of introduction. Nobody knew about him. This was never a place that was published. This was never a place that was professionally photographed. And there was very little information on them. Very few people actually knew that they existed pre-2020. Let's go to the next slide. What's so great about these cabins that he did, the first one, the main one in 54, and then the second guest cottage in 1960, is that it's just filled with all of these, hand-built details of Osipov's. And kind of, I give tours there now, and, I tell people that this is Osipov, kind of in his own words, by his own hand, which means that, and on a very shoestring budget, which means that this is not like the Little Strand house, which is, a house that had a good amount of budget and kind of a lot of craft and a lot of conversation and a lot of kind of, collaboration between him and the Little Strands and creating that kind of masterpiece house. I tell people that that's like the masterpiece oil painting, where every brush stroke is like a perfect, brush stroke, and every board and every light switch is in the right spot. This is not that. This is more of like a quick 30-second sketch of what a house should look like, in Osipov's mind. It's a gable roof with a couple of rooms underneath and no walls, not much else. And so it's this really rough kind of carpenter's sketch idea of what a house could be. It's a great learning resource to figure out and kind of decipher like what was important to him. Let's go to the next slide. The difficulty with this house, though, was that in 2020, which is the image on the left, the house was essentially left abandoned and in, dire need of repair. I joke that if it was anywhere else on the island except on that mountain, it would have been a tear down. The interiors were completely gutted. The wood was, falling apart. Shoji panels were all tattered. There was no interior furnishings, no interior fixtures. And getting it from that point 5 years ago to the picture on the right, where it is, more or less today, has been, a huge undertaking. Let's go to the next slide. So again, 2020 on the left, today on the right. The image on the left shows that the shoji doors were starting to be repaired, but what isn't shown here is that all of the interior wood surfaces had to be hand sanded down. So Mark Enomoto and a few other carpenters, craftsmen, and designers and artists have volunteered their time over the last 5 years in restoring this place, which is a resource that many private homeowners with mid-century houses don't have, is that kind of like, public support for conserving your own house. But we've taken it a long way from where it is on the left to where it is on the right. Let's go to the next slide. And in doing that, we went through the same process of, okay, well, what information can we find on its original intent? Because it had been changed, it had been modified, it had been left to degrade, and if we're going to be restoring things, if things need to be replaced or repaired, what was there originally? And so you go to the Ossipoff collection at Hamilton Library, you talk to Malia and you say, hey, a project like the Little Strand House or the IBM building, what kind of drawings do you have on that place? And you could get all of these renderings and all of this, so much information about the different sketches and iterations and construction details of how those great masterpiece buildings were put together. Unfortunately for the cabin, because again, it was a project for himself by himself, there's only 5 sketches on trace paper for this cabin in terms of historic resources. He didn't need to spend a lot of time communicating his ideas about this project to clients or carpenters. So really all we have is, framing plans and a couple of millwork details where he did need to have some carpenters help him out, but not a lot of information. And what we know about the history of this place, just from anecdote, was that, the house was essentially built in a weekend with the help of himself and a couple of his favorite Japanese carpenters, built the shell in a weekend. And then he spent the next 15 years really toying with it, experimenting with it, changing things out. So kind of this idea of restoring it, well, what period do you restore it to? Do you restore it to the 1954, the original building, or do you kind of do it to the 1969, 1970 end of life for the Ossipoffs at Palihua? Let's go to the next slide. So most of this restoration work that we've been doing over the last 5 years has primarily been done off of the resources of family photographs. So we've collected close to 100 family photographs from the Ossipoffs, the Goodsill family, the Lillestrand family, and even like a tenant that lived there post office Ossipoff kind of in the late 70s, early 80s. And kind of creating the rooms based on a comparison of all of these different photographs together. Like, what was that furniture? Hey, in the corner of this blurry photo, we see a chair. What was that chair? And can we find something like it today? Is there something available that's close to it? Could something like this be made? Hey, that beam is a little bit different. Hey, the brick's a little bit different. Oh, we could see that in a lot of these photos, there's the seagrass rug on the floor in the main house. Okay, well, that we can, where do we find that and source that? So let's go to the next slide. So a lot of it has been this like game that I play where I, take the old photo from the 50s and 60s and I find where it was taken and try to kind of take a photo of it today in that same location and kind of like play a little bit of game of I Spy, like, okay, well, what was there in the 50s? What has changed now? And, spot the differences between the photo on the left and this photo on the right. What was added, what's new. I'd love to spend some time replacing those gutters. That's one of the big projects that's on my long list of 160 items that we have yet to do. But you could see like, okay, it's a black and white photo. This is the only photo we had at the beginning, so we had to take a guess on what the color of the upholstery was. Well, we find out later that it was a more yellowy mustard. So shucks, we got the color wrong. But those are some of the things you learn over the time of kind of a restoration project. Let's go to the next house, next photo. So all of those projects and kind of helping out with those has led to a couple of Kokomo projects where we've actually been able to have clients pay us to restore their houses. And one of the 2 exciting ones, or this is the first one, is the old residence of Tommy Perkins. So Tommy Perkins and Alan Johnson were 2 architects at mid-century who actually were Ossipoff's classmates over at Berkeley, came out and here to Hawaii and had their own, kind of prolific career, but kept a very small office of just the 2 of them, mostly doing residential architecture and mostly these kind of hybrid modernist Japanese inspired Hawaii homes, a lot of them without walls, and a lot of them very experimental as well. This kind of like tropical environmental living. So this is Tommy Perkins' second house. It's a steel house on a very steep hillside. It's a steel house, steel frame, but it's got kind of a wood infill everywhere. So a lot of kind of Japanese joinery and Japanese elements, all rendered out of wood, kind of sitting within this steel box. Let's go to the next slide. And as we started doing the restoration on this house, I was able to get in touch with members of the Perkins family, Ida Perkins, particularly, who I met through the Goodsill family. So the Goodsills of, the old Goodsill house that Ossipoff did. And she was able to share, we didn't have any original drawings of the house or really any original images or anything. And there had been many modifications. It's now in its third owner. But she was able to share these old photographs of when it was first constructed, the old Robert Wencken photos from her father's archive. So again, we're doing this process of, okay, here's the image on the left from the 50s. Here's the image of it today. What's changed? What's the same? If we start repairing or changing things, are we doing it back to this 50s period? Or are there some things that have changed over time that, hey, maybe that was a good idea, good implementation. Maybe we should keep that. Let's go to the next slide. One of the kind of great things about the photo on the left is that from this main living room lanai space, back in the 50s, you could see all the way out to Diamond Head. This house is located in Makiki Heights, and the forest has completely overgrown around it. Don't have the view anymore, but the room still more or less works the same. The furniture's all been changed out. The shoji panels, though they need to be kind of repaired, possibly, restored or remade, they all still work and exist, so that all of the walls again could completely slide away and you just have this kind of bug screen exterior. Doesn't meet code today, I'll tell you that. So go to the next slide. The kitchen, right? So kitchens particularly are some of these spaces that their uses have changed, in society over the years, right? Where kitchens at one point were kind of this kind of back of house service space. Now they're really like the center of the home. So that's kind of one thing is like, okay, how do you perhaps open it up or kind of change that use with these historic homes? The other thing is that appliances come and go. So, this house was designed before dishwashers. So now a dishwasher exists in this house. And, those original cabinets have been torn out so that a dishwasher could fit. Or the original stove, which kind of had this like integrated electric stove, very similar to the Little Strand house. Now has a gas stove into it and big cut out of that original stainless steel. So that needs to be replaced. But oh man, can we do something back to the original intent? And how do you get light fixtures? If anyone's got a source for fiberglass shade light fixtures, that you want making that new, that'd be great to find. But also, in the distance there, you can see George Nakashima chairs, which are priceless these days. Do we try to find those? Let's go to the next slide. Even though we don't have original drawings, what we were able to get was original kind of photographs of it during its construction, which is a unique gift in that you can see really how this steel shell building was erected, and then the wood kind of used to infill it. And so this kind of gives us, as walls have been added to it on the interior over the years, and kind of as things have been, things are falling apart. Some of the wood has gotten really weathered on the outside. We could really figure out, okay, well, maybe that wall actually isn't structural. Maybe that wall wasn't actually supposed to be there. And now we can kind of figure out, what's load bearing and what's not if things need to get changed or replaced. Let's go to the next slide. This house, we found out after starting to work on it, was actually pretty famous in its day. There's a lot of photos of it in Sunset magazine over the decades. It was, the architect would do house tours of his house, of his home by appointment. So there's like all these old architecture guides or even just guidebooks of Honolulu from the 50s and 60s where this house is listed, and you like a number for Mr. Perkins was listed, so you could call him up and go visit it because this is, you know, some special home back in the day. And a lot of it, you know, exists as it once was, but just kind of needs to be cosmetically restored. Let's go to the next slide. As things have been changed, though, that gives us a little bit of opportunity to look at it and say, okay, well, you know, this house is, I think, one of only two on this collection that isn't on the historic register, and trying to convince the owner that maybe they should put on the register at some point. But things have been changed about it, and we can kind of date it back to what decade those changes happen, and you know, maybe we could undo some of those changes while introducing some new ones to make kind of the space work for how it works today. So there's this great atrium space on the inside that at one point was this great indoor-outdoor space, but is now kind of covered and partially enclosed, which makes it kind of uninhabitable, but should be this really special space. So how do we, you know, start kind of rethinking it to make it this special space again? And so we've done this really detailed as-built 3D model of it through Kokomo Studio, and kind of figured out how this space and this building works so that as we introduce some of these changes, we could think about, okay, well, like keeping the intent, not changing too much, and really kind of flushing those ideas out before, you know, things start getting ripped up and you know, replaced. Let's go to the next house. This is the last project I'll talk about, and this is kind of our newest project that we're talking about or working on with Kokomo. So I just talked about Tommy Perkins's house. This is Alan Johnson, his partner. This is his house in Manoa. The two of them moved to Hawaii in the 30s after graduating from Berkeley, and they both built kind of like sister houses right next door to each other in Manoa. Tommy Perkins's original house has been modified, has been changed, but this Alan Johnson house was built in 1938 for the cost of $4,000 all in, including the price of land, which is mind-boggling to think you could build a house like that today for $4,000. Let's go to the next slide. What's so incredible about this house is that it's this basically this like Japanese styled house built by Japanese carpenters, and in my mind really just taken from a book on, you know, traditional Japanese architecture and copied and pasted here in Manoa, with, you know, very few deviations from traditional Japanese architecture. But it's got these great moments to it, great craftsmanship to it. And again, another house without any walls, just bug screen on the outside and shoji panels to the inside of this Ngawa here that you enter in on. Let's go to the next slide. The house, for being from 1938, is in amazingly great condition and amazingly original condition. Very little has changed about it. There's been a few kind of cosmetic changes. As an example, the kind of the Fusama shoji panels here, kind of shown in gray in these two images, was a material that was introduced, you know, sometime later, is not the original fabric that was on there. The panels on the left are actually particle board with like a wallpaper cork placed on them, and they're deteriorating because it's particle board that's now, you know, absorbed all the moisture. And anyway, so there's like these little things that, you know, as we're looking at this house with the new owners who just bought it, and they're actually the neighbors right next door, like, hey, how do we restore this place? How do we fix it up? There's termite damage, there's weathering damage, there's all these kind of like little things that need to just be polished out. What was here originally? How do you find out what was here 90 years ago, close to 80 something years ago? Try to go to the next slide. There's also, you know, been some other little changes. Some interior partitions changed. You know, the kitchen again is another one of these spaces that changes as people use it. So appliances have changed, but there's still these like great moments with like a big integrated stainless steel countertop. Okay, let's save that. All the doors on the cabinets are unfortunately all falling apart. You pull open the drawers and there's termite damage everywhere. It's you know, okay, what can we save? What can we salvage? What can, you know, we restore and rebuild? It's a big kind of question. But again, like, how do you reverse engineer what was the original intent with this house? So if you go to the next slide, we had to dig deep into the archives. This was not a famous house like the Tommy Perkins house in the Kiki Heights. This was a house that had very few images published, and I haven't been able to find any original drawings of it. And I haven't been able to get in contact with the Johnson family to see if they have any information on it either. But what we did know was that there was an old article of mentioning it from 1954. So I was able to go to the library at UH there and pick up the Hawaii Farm and Home magazine from November of 45. I said 54. I apologize. 1945, so quite old. And in it, there's this 2-page spread with 3, photographs of the house shortly after its completion. Very grainy black and white photos, not a lot of information on them, but can see some things that have been changed, some things that no longer exist. These trellis members around the house no longer exist with vines growing over them. A big trellis out, kind of the first floor is gone. The original tree is still there, though, luckily. If you go to the next photo, I was also able to find, looking through Sunset Magazine and Honolulu Star Advertiser, not articles about the house that literally, mention, oh, this is the Alan Johnson house, but articles either on Japanese stylistic integration into Hawaii architecture or something around those lines. And there's these photos that I was like, oh, that's the Alan Johnson house. I recognize that. So there's a couple of photos from old magazines that I was able to collect that, are of the house. You can see old tatami mats and stuff like that in the interior. So I go to the next slide. And so we're going through the same process of, okay, let's document what was there, create this digital model of the house, and try to uncover, kind of do this comparison of what was there, what's there now. And as we know things need to be repaired, replaced, or restored, figuring out what was there and what was changed and how do we bring it back to that original intent. Okay, let's go to the last slide here. Realize I'm talking too long. These 5 houses all kind of represent various challenges in conserving modernist residences here in Hawaii. Some of them have a ton of information, and from kind of an academic standpoint, would be quite easy to maintain their restoration and kind of like their historical integrity. Some of them have very little information other than like 5 photographs. So figuring out what is original is really a game of reverse engineering and kind of really studying it and really studying in the context of that architect's work and other houses built of that period. Sometimes you can get, hundreds of volunteer hours to come out and help restore your house, like the cabins up at Palihua. And other times you're left with, hey, there's very little money in the family to fix the foundations on a masterpiece house. So kind of where do you find those funds? So there's a lot of challenges, both from like a design standpoint and a conservation standpoint, but also kind of a funding standpoint, finding ways to get funding. And then also finding carpenters, craftsmen, artisans, and materials to match those originals is quite another challenge. So all of that to say, this is a challenging job, but very inspiring pieces of architecture that need to be preserved and conserved. And I'm thankful that at least these 5 houses are under the right stewardship. Okay. Any questions?
Let me jump in here to help you out some, Graham. And that was just terrific and really interesting to see what a wealth of modernist stuff we have. Before we even get to the issue about conservation, it's what comes across quite a lot is the strong influence of Japanese architecture on modernism in this period. Can you say a little more about that maybe? Or
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's I'm partial to the modernist buildings here that have a lot of that Japanese influence. I mean, everyone knows the stories about Ossipoff kind of growing up in Japan, and so clearly that had an impact on his kind of design language over the years. Uh, Tommy Perkins spoke fluent Japanese and traveled to Japan quite a lot too. So, Alan Johnson and Perkins were quite infatuated with Japanese architecture. I would say even more so than a lot of kind of Ossipoff's work. Um, Wimberly had this kind of great way of bringing in many different cultures simultaneously. Like there's not one part that is, inherently Japanese or one part that's inherently Hawaii or Polynesian or parts that are, inherently just Mexican and stuff. So you kind of had this great kind of mixed plate, um, way of designing. But yeah, there's a lot of Japanese influence in a lot of the architecture of mid-century. And I think that if that wasn't, prescribed by the architect, that was because that was who was building it, was a lot of these kind of first and second generation Japanese carpenters. Um, and so, yeah, that's just what they knew how to build. I mean, there's stories about the Alan Johnson house, and I think it required very little drawings from Johnson, and this really leaned on the carpenter to build it how he thought was best to build it in this Japanese style. So, yeah, luckily they had that resource. We don't have that many people now that still know those techniques, materials, and all that kind of stuff.
trying to keep up a little with the questions in the chat. So there was one that's just slipped out, but it's code. How do you deal with code issues for properties like this? Are you allowed to keep low rails, or what about stairs without rails, or all these other sorts of issues?
I would say none of those houses that I shared are up to code, and they're all grandfathered in. Our kind of general rule of thumb is if you touch it, you have to update it. If like if we were to rip out the railings, well, we got to put back railings that meet code, and trying to, find a railing design that matches the original kind of look or feel or materials, but meets, handrail heights and guardrail heights and all that kind of stuff, or opening, dimensions, all that kind of stuff, is a challenge. So we just try not to touch it. There's a lot of things that we know aren't meeting code. So let's not touch those things, because those are some of those unique parts that you can't get away with anymore. And let's not, change it.
I imagine that in a private house, you have a little more leeway conscience-wise, right, than you would in a building being open to the public too, right?
Right, for sure. Well, you've got that problem though with houses like the Little Strand House, houses like the Ossipoff cabin now, that are open to the public, and you have people that come up there, and yeah, I mean, there's no ramps for one. The stairs are all uneven. There are no guardrails, but between you and that 300-foot cliff drop, there's a lot of liability. And so, having kind of guests understand that before they go in is tough, but also kind of opens up the owners or the trusts or the organizations, whoever, to a lot of liability issues.
Gotta admit, having gone to the Ballyhua cabin, there is a kind of, somehow the cliff was inviting me in ways I didn't want to be invited.
Yeah.
Death wish,
Yeah.
maybe. Now, there
Feel
was a
like you
quick
could.
question
Oh,
about
go ahead.
Manoa. They aren't all located in Manoa, but someone asked if they were all in Manoa.
Yeah, so the Charlot House, Kahala, Wimberly House is in Manoa. The Alan Johnson House is in Manoa. And then the Perkins residence is kind of Makiki Heights, and then Polyhua cabins by Asapaf are up in Palihua, which is west side up above Makakilo. Yeah, but Manoa's got, yeah, so many great houses. Wish I could get a chance to work on them all.
I thought the issue about to decide to restore to a time period and things like that, which of course then overlaps with issues of materials. And
Right.
a couple of people have asked about the materials, and as I going to throw something in, I kind of know sometimes the materials are no longer available, obviously, right? And maybe a lot of these are more natural materials, but I know like at the Eames house at Pacific Palisades, the paneling was all asbestos reinforced concrete and things like that, so they can't use that material anymore. I guess certain Formica isn't available, at least the design. And
Yeah.
I guess there is linoleum being made again now, but and you can, I guess you can get it done custom wise. But I was going to ask about, let's say with the kitchen of that one house where you've got plywood. So
Yeah.
how do you address the philosophy of this? Is it better to have an authentic original piece of plywood that's not really performing well anymore? Or is it better just to replace in kind?
Well, yeah, so we got a couple of kitchens, just, you know, that we're working on at both the Perkins and the Johnson residence. And those are falling apart and damaged. And I think it's a discussion with the homeowner. So with the Perkins house, which kind of like the steel house, right? Kind of the bigger one in Makiki Heights. That one we're kind of looking at like some new ideas with kind of custom carpentry, but maybe it is going to be plywood with some wood veneers on the outside. They were painted, so you know we got a little bit more kind of freedom there, I think, and kind of finding ways to make it look like the original, but still replacing them in kind. With the Johnson residents, the new homeowners, you know, at point blank kind of said, we don't want plywood in this house, you know, like the glues and things like that, the old chemicals that are in these, you know, plywood pieces from the 30s and 40s kind of, you know, give them allergies. So yeah, you know, that kitchen, those door faces, you know, are old Doug fir plywood. Can we get Doug fir solid pieces that maybe we can, you know, rebuild the cabinets in, maybe, you know, and do the same wipe off kind of paint on it and match the finish. But yeah, so plywood's
That's
always a
very
tricky thing because
interesting.
it gets eaten by bugs too, a lot.
Yeah. By the way, Malia had a few things in there, and of course, Malia is a often unheralded champion of modern architecture in Hawaii. So I want to give her credit because at her
Yeah,
work at the library at the university, she retains the archive for many of these buildings. So thanks, Malia.
yeah. Thank you, Malia. Yeah. Hopefully I gave you enough shout outs there with definitely the Charlot house and your help with the Palihua cabins.
There was
Couldn't have
one
done it
question
without
we
her.
better try to address about craftspeople. Um,
Yeah.
are
Who do
there
we
people
find?
around that do this kind of work still? And do you need to bring people in? Mm.
Um, so yeah, it's been an interesting kind of thing. We've been able to work with a couple of general contractors at different scales. Some of them we have one that this is his jam, is doing old houses and restoring them, and has a lot of knowledge about how to, you know, subs to use and materials and where to get them and things like that. So if you could find those kind of general contractors, they're great to have. They also cost quite a bit more, and a lot of them are close to retiring, so they, you know, are very choosy about their projects. Um, what we've found is actually I've got a couple of really close friends that are woodworkers, kind of Japanese carpentry enthusiasts, and they're not carpenters by trade, they're not contractors by trade, but love the craft that went into these original houses. And so we might sometimes work with a general contractor who can help us out with like the bigger infrastructure projects, but then we'll outsource or sub to these carpenters, these craftsmen, to do the fine woodworking, or
Good
getting a
project.
specialist. Yeah,
a good project for Historic Hawai Foundation to take on craft training for retirees.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
we've been actually we have been doing some trainings with partners because it's not necessarily our role to be the trainer, of course, but we've been doing 3 or 4 different workshops. We're in the process of planning our next one to bring together people for that purpose because there's definitely a shortage of tradespeople, all kinds of
Yeah.
trades, carpentry for sure. And just quickly, because I think it's time to wrap up. Graham, that was fantastic. Thank you. It will be recorded. Bill, I'm going to let you have the last word. I'll just say a few things and then I'll let you say goodbye to everyone and speak about the tropical modernism again if you'd like. Just quick question from Keith. Is the Allen residence on the National Register of Historic Places, Graham?
It's certainly on the state register of
It's on the
historic
state.
places. I can't remember if it's on the national or not.
I don't remember
Might,
either.
yeah,
That
might be.
that's okay. It should be
Yeah.
available to Keith on our website. You can take a look at the historic properties. I want to just really thank you, Graham. It was a great overview and it's fascinating. Thank you, Bill, so much for curating and moderating. I want to thank everyone for joining us. This is our last one for 2025. I also do want to give a shout out to my colleague, Michelle Kisick, who's been behind the scenes, but super important for keeping us on track throughout the series. I want to do a quick event announcement, which is on a different topic, but since I have your ear, HHF and Hilo's Temple Children are co-hosting a free in-person public event in Hilo for folks from Hilo or people planning to be in Hilo on March 21st. We'll be highlighting a public mural project supported by a grant through the HHF Hilo Preservation and Beautification Program. It will be a short film screening and panel discussion held at Naleo Television Studio in Hilo from 5:30 to 7 p.m. with a reception, and you can register for that probably by the end of the week, if not sooner, on our website. And again, please take a moment to take the survey, and thank you for your interest to the audience and to all our community for caring about saving places and the series. And join us. You can donate to support series like this and programming like this join us on the HHF website. And I want to hand it back to Bill to have the final words.
Thanks. I want to say the same to all the audience. Thank you. You've been a great audience this year. Lots of great questions and everything. And we will think of a good topic for next year. And I really enjoy our partnership with the Historic Hawai Foundation. I do want to give a plug. I put it in the chat, but we're having a conference/symposium called Tropical Modernism Revisited, a Global Perspective. And we're using money from the Duan Quan Fund to pay for a lot of it, but we're also getting donations from like the Fulbright Association and Lillestrand House and other organizations to be able to put this on. Graham will be presenting. Dean Sakamoto will be presenting about Asapaf, and we have 8 speakers coming from around the world dealing with Africa, South Asia, the Middle East. Anyway, Brazil, Mexico, so it'll be a terrific event. It's March 29 at the Iman Center at East West Center, Jefferson Hall, from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock. I posted the link to Eventbrite as well. It's only $40 if you're a member of Docomomo. If you come for 20, if you're a student, it's free, but you do need to register. So we'll get a head count. And we figured out the meal is worth in itself about 70. So you're already saving half price just to do this. So we hope we can see some of you at this conference, and we're going to talk about tropical modernism, which is an important part of the experience in Hawaii, and of course our own historic resource. By the way, Design Within Reach has George Nakashima chairs for $8.90, so they still make them.
Yeah.
First Dibs has a set of 6 for $12,000.
There you go. So cheap. Yeah, it's either that or a new kitchen. I don't know.
Well, there are probably some knockoffs that come close, but aren't the same. but anyway.
Yeah.
But 890 is
Thank
not so
you.
bad. That's not like over the top, you know, for
It's,
a good
Well,
quality kitchen chair. So, Graham, thank you so
thank
much.
you. Thank
And
you,
yeah, yeah.
That was
Michelle, thank you
wonderful.
too.
I'll have the
So we'll
video
see
up
you next
shortly.
year, or some of you I'll see before. So, ahui ho.
Oh, hui ho. Thank you, everyone.
Bye,
Aloha.
everyone. Thank you all.